is Dr. Sujin. Sujin Huggins is an associate professor at the School of Information Studies at Dominican in River Forest, Illinois. She is a partner with Targeting Autism Grant. Sujin's been part of the grant, I also believe, since the initiation of it, and has been doing research. She's been coordinating the trainer programs that have taken place in this particular iteration of the grant. Sujin's from Trinidad, and prior to pursuing her PhD at the University of Illinois, she worked as a librarian at the National Library of Trinidad and Tobago. So another international presentation for you. Sujin's going to tell us about autism in libraries in Trinidad.
Let's see what's most effective. Good evening, everyone. I want to echo Katie's sentiment, just thanking everyone who presented over the last 2 days. It's been a remarkable time. My mind is swimming with so many ideas that I don't know that I remember anything I'm supposed to talk about. So bear with me. It'll just be filled with gratuitous shots of my country that make me feel extremely homesick. So this is not research. I'll just put that disclaimer out there. It's more of a question that I had that I needed answered, because while I was a practitioner in Trinidad, autism wasn't necessarily something on my radar. And so as we were talking about and developing the forum and all of the training that I've been doing, my question was, so what is happening in my country? And of course, the extension to that will be, what can I do to change or help anything that's not happening in the country? Okay. So I'm going to quickly run through a little bit about Trinidad and Tobago. By a show of hands, how many of you know where Trinidad is or anything about Trinidad? Okay, so 3 people, 4 people, 5. Yes, 6, okay. That's normal. That's actually way above average. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'll talk about what I've discovered through web resources related to autism in Trinidad and my own personal experiences, and then a little bit about libraries in Trinidad and Tobago, and then points of connection. Okay, so why autism, why me, why now, why? And I got this idea from Eradicate yesterday about the story. Need to have a story. So I first became aware of autism somewhere in the 80s. Oh, good grief, sorry. All right, there we go. This is my cousin Dwayne, who is now in his mid-30s. Is it the touching thing again? I'm just supposed to move and then stop. Ghost in the machine. Why? All right. Stay. Suzanne. Yeah, thank you. It's always the case with technology and me. Back again, back again. Okay, there it is. All right, so cousin Dwayne. No.
It's set on a slideshow, so it is up there.
Oh, no, I don't want to do that. How do we undo that then? Stop. Okay. Right, so my cousin Dwayne was born sometime in 1982 or 83. I was still relatively young. I won't date myself, but yeah. And when he was born, he was very hyperactive, or when he was a child, he was very hyperactive. He didn't make eye contact, he didn't respond to anyone. He lived with his mother, who was a single mother, and she lived with her mother, my great aunt. And no one really knew why he behaved that way. And as you mentioned, Samuel, in the culture, if a child doesn't conform, you have questions like, what's wrong? What's wrong with the parents? What are you giving them to eat? How are you putting them to bed at night? And all of these things. And my great aunt, who was from the old school and believed in discipline, would try to get him to stay still, would try to teach him how to recognize letters. And at one point, he would have such dramatic meltdowns, now I know what the term is so I can use it, that she would actually have to restrain him by tying his leg to a chair, not in a way that would hurt him, but just to prevent him from hurting himself or anyone else around. So he was, the doctor said he was hyperactive. They said that maybe he had hearing issues and all sorts of diagnoses until at age 7, someone finally recognized that, hey, this is autism, this is what it is, and this is what we need to do. And so his mother became a tireless parental advocate at that point and got him into a special school and did everything that she was able to do with her resources to allow him to be the exceptional young man that he is today. And that picture in particular was taken last year while we were in Trinidad after church, because he goes to church every week and he follows the service and he helps out with the collection. He does everything. He has an incredible sense of direction. He can calculate faster than a calculator. He can play any song on the keyboard after hearing it once, and he does reproductions of the stained glass windows in the Catholic Church every week. He is non-speaking, which is my new term, thank you again. And he, when he was growing up, and he still does it, he can engage in echolalia, so he will repeat things and he will phonetically spell them out. And I was so fascinated by that process and his way of communicating that when I was in my final year of undergrad studies at the University of the West Indies, I did a case study on his language acquisition. I was a linguistics major. Nobody in the university knew anything about autism, so I had no supervision, which at the time seemed like a good idea, because then how are you going to grade my paper if you don't know? But I had to teach myself all about it, and I spent an inordinate amount of time in the medical library just looking at text, very dense text, trying to figure out what was going on and trying to document his language acquisition process in retrospect. So it was just surreptitious that many years later I found this wonderful group of people, and I'm able to make an even larger contribution to the process and autism now in honor of my cousin. So that's my life story, and we'll move on to the next slide. Maybe Suzanne, okay, I did it. Right, so Trinidad and Tobago, the southernmost island of the Caribbean archipelago. As you can see, Venezuela is just sticking out there in green. And that's Trinidad, and that's Tobago, much smaller up in the corner. The population is estimated right now at 1.372 million people. So I don't know, Chicago maybe as big as, or a little bit smaller. Most of the population is concentrated on the the west coast, some parts of what we call the east-west corridor, and then in the southern areas, but primarily on the west coast, and then there are other areas in between. In terms of demographics, again, I don't know if you would know anything of the history of Trinidad and Tobago, probably not, but we've had quite a number of European settlers and colonizers. So first the Spanish, then the French, then the British, before we became independent. So in terms of population ethnic composition, we have about 40% Black or African Trinidadian, we have about 40% East Indian, who were brought in as indentured laborers after slavery ended and emancipation took place. And then the other numbers from the estimates I looked up include 18% who identify as mixed or other, 0.6% white, and 1.2% Asian, primarily Chinese, but I'm sure there are some Koreans in there and maybe Japanese from other places as well. Okay, so that's Trinidad in a nutshell, completely surrounded by water, which is why Illinois as a landlocked place is just, yeah, understand it. Right, next. Okay, so yeah, more gratuitous shots just to again set up this context. That's our national flag there up in the corner. That's our food. If you ever have a chance to visit Trinidad, or even go to New York. New York, that's right, carry news. You find yourself a Trinidadian restaurant and whatever they give you, you eat it, and then you thank me and you're welcome in advance. Our national music is Calypso. That's a picture of one of the premier female calypsonians in the country, Calypso Rose. We have the biggest, largest, most gigantic carnival celebration in the world. Brazil has more people, we have more party. We start celebrating Carnival in September of one year, and we end at midnight, the day before Ash Wednesday, or right, midnight Ash Wednesday starts at 12:01. So we party for months. I kid you not. Here, we invented the steel pan. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. It's the only musical instrument that was invented in the 20th century, and it came from us. And I don't think that's very clear, but it shows the religious affiliations in Trinidad and the different religions or religious groups that are represented. And what that essentially means is that we recognize every major religious or ethnic holiday. So we have 17 public holidays per year. And if the public holiday falls on a Thursday, nobody expects anyone to show up on a Friday. So 4-day weekend. Oh yeah, and that picture in between means that we have oil, which makes us one of the probably the only industrialized island in the Caribbean, so that we don't rely on tourism as our major means of income. In Tobago, they're a little more laid back and they have nicer beaches, so if you want a tourist experience, go there. Trinidad, no, not so much. You go there to party though. All right. Okay, so oops, there we go again, back. Forward. Did I set it up again? What am I doing to this?
Right arrow, yeah.
All right. Okay, so now we can get. Okay, I'll let Susan. All right. So, before looking at autism specifically, I thought it would be instrumental or informative to have a sense of what the disability legislation, laws, and general awareness was. I came across this document called the National Policy on Persons with Disabilities, as published in June of 2017. And as stated on, I forgot to put the page reference, and I'm a librarian, I should know better. I think it's page 3 or 4. The primary goal of the national policy on persons with disabilities is to create a social and physical environment which promotes inclusion, accessibility, integration, and full participation of persons with disabilities. The national policy provides a comprehensive framework for achieving social inclusion and equality of opportunity for all persons with disabilities in Trinidad and Tobago. And I thought, well, that's great, that's wonderful, that's promising that such legislation exists. And then I did a Control F of the document to identify instances where the word autism was mentioned. And there's one instance in the glossary of terms, Mary looks crestfallen, but in a good way, because it was listed as the first in the list of disabilities or what's recognized as a disability. So that seemed promising in that it is clearly part of that umbrella, and that should also be part of the agenda of things addressed. I also found out that before they completed this draft, this was based on an earlier iteration of the policy that was published in 2005. And so they did have some experience implementing the original policy document, but they wanted feedback from stakeholders to ensure that all groups and all possible disabilities were being represented. And so they incorporated a lot of the feedback that they received, including those from organizations serving persons with autism in the country. So again, that was very promising that those changes were made and that feedback was received. Moving on, the priority areas that they listed for intervention, and the ones that I highlighted without really knowing at the time, are ones that I think libraries, or the libraries in Trinidad in particular, can really focus on and help with implementation. So those include public awareness, education and training, access to information and communication, promoting the rights of women and children, technical aids and equipment. I mean, it may be more challenging to perhaps have librarians take the lead or play a part in access to built environment or health rehabilitation and habilitation. You know, maybe we don't really fit everywhere, but I thought in terms of the priorities that certainly there's a place for us at the table in the wider discussion. And on. Okay, so this is, because my slides are not very text heavy and dense, I have hyperlinked a lot of the screenshots, so if you're interested in learning more, you can, but I'm just going to kind of breeze through the images. So the ministry charged with implementing a lot of these policies, or at least overseeing the implementation in other parts of the government structure, is the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, and in particular the Disability Affairs Unit. And as you can see, they are responsible for coordinating and monitoring the implementation of the policy, the national policy. They provide technical support and referrals to families, organizations, etc. They evaluate requests for assistance from NGOs and individuals, and they network with NGOs to, again, bring everyone together. Next one. Okay, so that's that for laws. And, oh God, I'm not, right. So autism in Trinidad and Tobago, from what I was able to discover, as I said, being away from the context and not being in a position to conduct my own research. Okay. So I did find that there is one organization in particular, the Autism Society of Trinidad and Tobago, that I'll talk about a little bit more in a few slides, but they seem to be at the forefront of autism advocacy and service and coordination and influence in the country. And so they by their estimates, they thought that there could be as many as 16,000 persons living with autism in the country. They have approximately 600 or over 600 persons registered with their agency, but by extrapolating on the ratio of, I think, 1 to 78, which was the international ratio that they used, they estimated that there are at least, can't do the math, it's too late in the day, 15,400 persons with autism, not identified, not diagnosed, not receiving services, or some other variation of that. Right? They also mentioned that for those who have been diagnosed, there's often a struggle to find money to pay for therapy, which in and of itself is limited in its availability. Because again, if you think only 600 people in the country have autism, and even though it's part of the larger UN definition and all of the other definitions that are used, the government's not going to zero in on that in a way that would really be impactful and institutionalized. And so they have been tireless advocates for quite some time, trying to raise the visibility and to say, hey, this is something that we need to pay attention to because we need to capture more of the population and we need to provide the governmental support to do so. Okay, they also mentioned in a piece that many people with autism are being turned away from regular and special educational environments because teachers are not equipped. They don't know how to work with autistic children, or they are not, or they are not potty trained, which is really insignificant as a reason for not providing services to our children. So in general, the way the education system is structured, I think we're only now getting into this idea of early childhood education that is free and available for everyone. Otherwise, from the primary grades, you're required to go to school, everything is covered from then until you complete secondary school, and then you go on to university. And at first it was free, then it wasn't free for a while, then it was free again, but you know, it's not going to break the bank as it does here in some cases, nothing personal. But education is a big deal in the country, and yet there isn't really that emphasis for what you would call neurotypical students and early intervention. And so where there is the greatest need among the autistic population, there isn't that built into the system either. And so if a parent needs to put a child in a paid preschool program and that child is acting up and they don't know why because they don't have the training and sensitivity, then what happens to that child? Falls through the cracks. So again, in jumping ahead a little bit, for libraries, as we all know, because we are all trained in the US context, early childhood education is a big part of what we do, and we fill those gaps in real and meaningful ways. So that if we don't have that awareness of this is an issue, some children can come to our libraries and they can be autistic, and we have to know and help parents through that process and know where to send them, then that's a huge missed opportunity. Okay, next one. Okay, and this is a video that I found too of a 13-year-old boy who, without going into details about how the education system works again, but let's just say at the end of elementary school, you take a major examination, and after this examination, or the results determine where you are placed for your secondary school education. And there are different types of secondary school experiences. Some are considered prestigious schools, which means that you have free schooling for 7 continuous years before going on to university. So he passed his exam and was placed in one of the top male colleges in the country, Queen's Royal College. Famous people went there. Our first prime minister was educated at this college. So to be on the spectrum and to achieve that was huge, or is huge. It's a big deal. And so I came across this video. I'll just play a little bit for you if we can, because I'm aware of the time and I don't want to keep you past getting out of there. Susan's waving me up. No, it's okay, we can stay. Is it playing? If you click on it. Oh, dang it.
Can I, what do I Google?
Yeah, we can, I'll let you go back. So the title is exactly what it is.
Oh.
Up there. It's supposed to be hyperlink.
This?
Yeah, living, or embedded rather.
Oh, and I can't copy it.
Yes. Well, we can cycle around it, maybe just play it up in the end. If you can't get it. Comedy or whatever it is.
Living with autism in Trinidad. Scott, are you doing that?
No, oh, I'm touching it, but I. Let's see. There it is.
My name is Roy McEwen, and I am autistic. I was diagnosed with autism at the age of 3. Shortly after my vocabulary had become severely limited, and I could only say words like T. They told my mom that I would never be able to speak again. But here I am, speaking to you. 2 years ago, while preparing for SEA, it was said that I didn't even belong in secondary school. Yet here I stand, proudly wearing the uniform of Queen's Royal College. Well, or sit. Being an autistic child, I did overcome many challenges to get where I currently am. I've been stomped on, bullied, ridiculed, laughed at, and even excluded from certain groups. I've been rejected by many schools, but I've been accepted by even greater ones. Schools with vision that taught me that I truly matter. Every single teacher who has thought me worthy to be taught has taught me about passion and spirit and heart. These include my teachers in India, like Miss Benaifa and Miss Gitanjali, to the indomitable Miss Colvin in Libya, and at home, the big-hearted Miss Jackson David, and my amazingly passionate teachers at QRC, like Miss Abner, Miss Thompson, Mr. Warwood, Mr. Reyes, Miss Guy Prasad, the list goes on and on. And even and of course our principal, Mr. David Simon, who leads with vision and focus. Of course, I couldn't accomplish anything without a team of support, including my mom, my brother Adrian, my angel on earth Aunt Teresa, Dr. Natalie Dick, my therapist, classmates, and friends. Oh, friends. I think if I had to wish for something for Christmas, it would be for a friend. At times, I regret being on the spectrum. I wish I was normal, not stuck with some mental disorder, so that I could be treated like an imbecile, like a failure, like anything less than human. But I've discovered something important that we must all take to heart. You must know yourself. You must know who you are. Because if you know yourself, and more importantly, believe in yourself, then you won't need the naysayers to point you in any kind of direction. The largest oak tree was once a little nut that held its ground. You must hold your ground. You must stand strong. The Lord makes no mistakes. If you put trust in Him, then no one can bring you down. Don't believe me? Well, lots of successful individuals with autism, like Bill Gates, the CEO of Microsoft, Tim Burton, a very well-known Disney animator, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, a very famous classical music writer. They were all on the spectrum, at least facing their challenges. So I no longer wish to be like everyone else. All I want to be is always unique, totally interesting, and sometimes mysterious. I look just like you, but I see the world from a different perspective. And yet, if you cut me, I will be just like you. Except from now on, my blood will be tinged royal blue.
Hopefully, he will be the Prime Minister of the country one day, and then we can get back on track to develop as a nation. All right, so that was a personal perspective, and what I found generally is beyond what the government may or may not do for persons with disabilities, most of the activity around autism and autism awareness, advocacy, and services, as I said, centered or focused or came out of organizations, NGOs within the country. And as I mentioned before, at the forefront of that is the Autism Society of Trinidad and Tobago. And they are a parent support group for families of persons diagnosed with ASD. They offer services to children and adults with ASD, as well as training. And they host a lot of events that I'll talk about a bit more in the other one. Shall I try, or you go?
Go for it.
Try it. Okay.
Or not.
Or not. Not.
What the heck are you doing?
I really don't know. It's like I'm magnetized or something.
That must be it.
It's messing it up. So, that whole thing is gone. Oh no, that's just the hyperlink. We can get out of there. This next. Okay, so another one is the Autism Parents Association of Trinidad and Tobago, which I believe my cousin was a part of in the early days, trying to get services and raise awareness for my younger cousin Dwayne. And that was created as a comprehensive database of doctors, therapists, psychologists, educators, special needs schools, and more for its members. And membership is free, and they try to offer free services through the organization. The next one. Okay, there is one early intervention school that I found, and that's the Right Start Early Intervention Program, which is an educational program designed to meet the needs of learners with autism. They cater for children ages 18 months to 6 years who have been diagnosed or display characteristics. And in March of this year, they opened the first sensory gym, which is, the hyperlink is not visible there, but that's a shot of the new sensory gym to help with play therapy and other forms. No, you don't need to. Yeah, I think it's just the one picture in the write-up. There's also a lot of work around fundraising because resources, money, that's always an issue. And this is the Support Autism TNT group established by young professionals to raise funds that will assist children with autism, access therapy, educational opportunities, and to provide financial and psychological support for parents, caregivers, and siblings of children with the disorder. The Blue Horse Foundation is another registered nonprofit that is committed to increasing the awareness of autism in Trinidad and Tobago and its effects on individuals and families and society. So they do not offer direct services necessarily, but they do engage in campaigns and sensitivity training and awareness around the topic. Okay. And then this online resource guide that is not specific to autism, but a range of developmental and physical disabilities called Child Space. And it's really comprehensive. And again, if you're interested and you click on it, or if we click on it now, you'll see a long list of therapists and counselors and anything else you can think of that a parent would need to assist with a child. Okay, next one. And some of the activities and events around raising awareness and sort of coming out of those organizations just referenced. Autism walks and fairs. There were a lot of images of individuals walking for autism, as they call it, and not just in April when it's recognized, but throughout the year. They would just organize a walk in different parts of the country. And one of the quotes I found said, "We walk because children and adults with autism should be included in policies on education, healthcare, employment, housing, social, and family services." So every time they do that in a community, someone will ask the question, well, what's that about? What's autism? And it will trickle down or trigger something from there. Okay, the next slide. Training workshops, again, spearheaded primarily by the Autistic Society of Trinidad and Tobago, but others also engage. They offer certificate training, which is a paid program that any institution can pay for and have their personnel trained. They collaborate with schools in the East-West corridor, as we call it, to help sensitize teachers to be more aware of what autism looks like in the classroom and how it might present. They offer workshops for parents and caregivers so that they can be more aware of their needs and attend to their needs. And these are just some of the images that they posted on their Facebook page about that. Another activity, dedicated camps and programs for persons with autism. So there are summer camps, which I abhor the term summer in a Trinidad context because we have two seasons, wet and dry. So I don't know when summer is. Summer is a year-round camp for us, if that's the case. But there are special vocational camps, not just for the young ones, but for the older ones as well, life skill training, yoga, other things, a range of programs that they offer through their organization. Next one, outings and special events for families, which again is another wonderful idea, and you know, in some cases it might be the only way that families can get out of their homes or their communities to experience something else. And so the opening shot on the first slide and that one there on the left is of the beach event. So children and adults with autism and their families and caregivers all gathered on the beach and had a wonderful time. There's Family Bazaar. This one down here is a commemoration of Diwali, the Festival of Lights, the Hindu festival, and they actually created a sensory commemoration or celebration of Diwali, which was just really wonderful to see and know that they were able to do that. And they offered a lot of programs and other things that night. Okay, and then resources that raise awareness, including the creation of this little book, which I have a copy of that my cousin sent to me, and the author, not just destroying technology, but print material as well. The author, Joy Valdez, collected stories from families and poetry, however they wanted to express themselves, and put it in this book that is now available to anyone who wants to learn more of what it's really like to live with someone on the spectrum or to be someone on the spectrum and having those voices. There are a number of articles that are published in the daily newspapers on an almost consistent basis about autism, either again general raising of awareness or featuring a person on the spectrum or some of the challenges that they face, just bringing to light these issues through the newspaper, and again spearheaded by those organizations and those parents and those people who know that it's important to really create that intensity and level of awareness. And then resources produced by ASTT that are available at coffee shops and other places. Okay, so now on to libraries in Trinidad and Tobago, and that's a shot of the National Library building that was opened in 2003 and designed by one of our famous architects, Colin Laird. We can go on. That's another shot just because that's where I worked and I miss it. And the one on the left is a shot of the Carnegie Free Library that was established in 1919 in Trinidad and Tobago as well. Okay. That's an old firehouse, so they built it around it. All right, so in Trinidad, it's a little bit different from the US context where every community, every state has autonomy, I guess, over their library system or what they want to do. In Trinidad, there is one body now in charge of library services, and that body is the National Library and Information System Authority, or NALIS. Okay? And the act came into effect in 1998, and now they administer the development and coordination of library and information services. So NALIS oversees the Heritage Library, the 24 public libraries in Trinidad, 4 mobile libraries with visits to 140 locations, 4 libraries in correctional institutions, 27 governmental agencies, and 134 secondary schools. So everything more or less goes through NALIS in terms of library coordination. Okay, and that's just a map of where those public libraries are in Trinidad as opposed to Tobago. Right, so now we get into the nitty-gritty of what does the library do around autism and what should they be doing. So under the UN Convention on Persons with Disabilities and all of the goals that Nancy mentioned earlier, and the policy as well, the library service has really been committed to serving persons with disabilities. But that service is primarily in the area of physical disabilities and visual, hearing disabilities, and not so much in the cognitive area, at least not from what we know now and not from what we know we can do. So this is on the web page, and it's a screenshot of it, but again, there's hyperlinked if you want to take a look. So you talk about access for the differently able users, and there's a long list of ways that the library can accommodate users with visual disabilities or physical disabilities. In the next slide, here we have all of the assistive technology for visually impaired persons. And it's, again, a very long list. And then on the next slide, which I was happy to see, I'm not knocking them, I was happy to see this because it wasn't there when I was there, autism and autism spectrum disorders. And so there's a list of sort of general websites giving general information about autism and spectrum disorders. Nothing specific to library services and nothing really specific to the local context, which I found a little bit troubling. Okay, next slide, and I promise you just a few more to go. Autism in the collection. So I thought, okay, there are some web resources. What other points of entry are there? So I found 103 items in the collection, in the catalog. 10 were reference books, 26 were juvenile books, 36 were young adult books, and others just sort of were in between the classification. So it's there, but it's not highly visible. And if a parent or anyone comes to the library not knowing how to navigate it, not being sure what's available, we know now that best practice is to have something permanent on display in a corner that clearly states, if there is this need, here are the resources that speak to that need. That's easy enough to do. I mean, I work there, I know that the people in acquisition don't talk to each other, so we end up with 30 copies of the same books that no one wants to read. So my hope is that there are enough copies to make these reading corners in every library and to make that information more visible. Next slide. Hey, and as far as displays or any sort of programming, this was it. I don't want to say again, because I'm not there to harass people every day and get the answers, that this is all there is, but this is all I found on the web. And this is a display that was created by the Autism Society of Trinidad and Tobago and staged in the library, or the branch library that's closest to their headquarters, which is called Autism Place. And so this is the only visual and the only documentation I have of any programming going on in the library, which, if it's true, is insane. Because we just saw all of the other activities taking place and organized by all of these organizations. There's nothing to say that it can't take place in the library or in conjunction with the library, or the library can't take the lead on a lot of them. So the next slide. When next I go home, or whenever the executive director decides to take my calls again, I will ensure that the librarians and staff are prepared to adequately serve persons with autism, because I know for a fact that training takes place all the time. When I was there, we learned sign language so that we could do story time using sign language. We learned how to use the assistive technology. This is nothing new and out of their comfort zone, and it's an easy remedy. I would encourage them to work with agencies and service providers to increase awareness, because if you're the information center, you need to have a more visible role and play a more active part in that. Improve and increase access to autism resources, and then to increase programming efforts through the library systems with that reach geographically on the island. And that is it for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sujin.